Dr.Ratio is an imaginary single target follow-up attack DPS who relies on the enemies to be debuffed. In this video, I'm going to show you what icons to use, what traces to prioritize, what relics and ornaments to use, as well as what teams to use, and a showcase at the very end. Let's get to it. So for his light cones, obviously his signature 5-star light cone is going to be the best for him, as well as coming in at a close second would be Topaz's signature light cone as well. But if you don't have these light cones, a really good free-to-play alternative would be the 4-star light cone, Only Silence Remains, because it gives Dr.Ratio a good chunk of attack percentage and it gives him a lot of crit rate, but only if there are 2 or fewer enemies on the field, which if you're going to use Dr.Ratio shouldn't really be a problem because he's already meant to be used as a single target follow-up DPS. So usually these conditions are already going to be met. If you don't have that 4-star at Superimposition 5, a really good alternative would also be the 5-star light cone Cruising in the Stellar Sea that you can get from the Simulated Universe and superimpose to level 5 if you've been playing the game a lot and have enough currency to buy the light cone and superimpose it to level 5. But if you don't have that either, Return to Darkness would also be a decent alternative. When it comes to his relics, Pioneer Diver of Dead Waters is going to be his best in-slot relic set because, like I said at the beginning of the video, Dr.Ratio relies heavily on the enemies being debuffed, meaning that the same way on how you can easily meet the prerequisites of the light cone, the same way you can meet the prerequisites for this relic since you're already going to be meeting them in the first place, because that's how his kit is meant to be used. It increases his damage dealt to enemies with debuffs by 12%, and it increases his crit rate by 4%. He can also do either 8 to 12% more crit damage to enemies that have either 2 to 3 debuffs respectively. And if Dr.Ratio can apply a debuff on the enemy, which he should be able to with his ultimate, it increases the aforementioned effect by 100% for 1 turn. A decent alternative to that set would be a hybrid set between a 2-piece of the Pioneer Diving Water set and a 2-piece of the Ash Blazing Grand Duke set, because the Ash Blazing Grand Duke set is able to increase his follow-up attack by 20%, and the Pioneer Diver of Dead Waters is able to increase his damage dealt by 12% if an enemy is debuffed, which again you're probably already going to be doing, which again they probably already will be because that's how Ratio's kit works. And then you can also run another hybrid set between 2 of the Ash Blazing Grand Duke set and then 2 of the Musketeer of Wild Wheat set for that 12% more attack, or 2 of the Wastelander of Banditry Desert set for that 10% more imaginary damage. And then when it comes to his planner ornaments, the Ran is going to be his best in slot because every time either the wearer of the set, which is going to be Dr.Ratio, or one of his allies, which because Dr.Ratio heavily depends on a lot of follow-up attack units, the requirements of the set are going to be really easy to be procced. And then for his planner sets, the Ran is going to be his best in slot because Dr.Ratio is going to be ran in a team consisting of a lot of follow-up attack units, which is going to easily be able to trigger the requirements for this set, which is that every time either Dr.Ratio or one of your other allies does a follow-up attack, you're going to get 1 stack of merit, which is going to increase your follow-up attack by 5%, stacking up, which will ultimately give you 25% attack follow-up attack damage. And then once you reach those 5 stacks, you'll additionally get 25% more crit damage. A good alternative would be Inert Salsoto because it gives the wearer 8% crit rate, and then once you've reached at least 50% or higher crit rate, your ultimate and follow-up attack damage is going to be increased by 15%. Firmament Frontline is also a decent alternative, but keep in mind that the requirements to reach the buffs are a bit harder since you have to speed tune by a lot. So what this set is going to give you is a 12% attack, and then once your speed is either 135 or 160, the wearer is going to deal either 12 or 18% damage respectively. And then for your stats, you're going to want to run a standard crit build in where your main body stat is going to have either crit rate or crit damage, your main beat stat is going to have either speed or attack, your planner spear is going to have imaginary damage bonus, and your link rope is going to have more attack percentage. For your substats, again, you're going to want either crit rate or crit damage, some attack percentage in there would be nice. And then if you're using the Glamis' set, having a lot of speed in there so that you can meet those requirements would also be good. For your traces, you're going to want to prioritize getting your talent, since that's what procs his follow-up attack damage, which is where his main DPS comes from. Then you're going to want to prioritize leveling up his skill. After that, you're going to want to level up his ultimate and then his basic attack. For his bonus abilities, you're going to want to prioritize unlocking Summation first, because when Dr.Ratio uses his skill, for every debuff on the target, his crit rate is going to be increased by 2.5% and his crit damage by 5%, up to 6 times. After that, you're going to want to prioritize getting Deduction, because when a target has 3 or more debuffs, which chances are they are going to already have, for every debuff, Dr.Ratio is going to do 10% more damage, up to a maximum of 50%. After that, you're going to want to get Inference, because after Dr.Ratio uses his skill, there's a 100% chance to reduce the enemy's effect resistance by 10%, which will make it easier to apply those debuffs that you want to apply, to take advantage of his previous bonus abilities, as well as his skill, which I'll explain in the showcase. Like I said before, when it comes to teams, Dr.Ratio is going to be ran in a team consisting heavily of follow-up attack damage users or buffers, such as Aventurine to sustain, Topaz to follow-up attack and increase your damage, as well as Robin for those coordinated attacks, and just overall really good attack and damage buffs that your standard Harmony unit would give. But if you don't have Robin, Topaz, and Aventurine, because that could be a pretty expensive team to run, consisting of 4 or 5 stars, some decent alternatives would be Pella and Silverwolf to not only apply debuffs, but to also defense shred the enemy. And then when it comes to buffing Dr.Ratio, Team Yoon and the Yukong would also be decent alternatives to provide attack buffs, energy regen, and damage boosts as well. And then when it comes to alternatives for Aventurine, there really isn't any other sustainer that is able to synergize as well as Aventurine does with Dr.Ratio. So any good sustainer like Fushuan, Huohuo, Luosha would suffice. Okay, so the way you want to use Dr.Ratio is first, you want to use your Harmony units to buff him as much as you can. Then you're going to want to use your supports that debuff the enemy to apply as many debuffs as you can. So like for example, Pella is going to apply a lot of defense shred to the enemy, so that whenever you use his skill, you're going to have a higher chance of triggering his follow-up attack, right? So like the way his skill works is that every enemy starts with a 40% chance of triggering his follow-up attack, and then the more debuffs you apply, the higher chance you have to trigger those follow-up attacks. So for every debuff the enemy has, there's going to be a 20% higher chance to trigger Dr.Ratio's follow-up attack. So like right here, this Void Ranger has 3 debuffs on him, which is going to make it to where I have a 100% chance to trigger a follow-up attack. But then this Void Ranger over here only has 1 debuff, meaning that I only have 1 instance of a 20% chance higher to hit the enemy, meaning that he only went from 40% to 60% rather than from 40% to 100% chance of triggering the follow-up attack. So like now that my Dr.Ratio has the buffs from my Team Yoon and the enemy has been debuffed, so that not only can I defense shred, but I can actually trigger my follow-up attack, which is where most of Dr.Ratio's DPS is going to come from. I can use his skill and then he'll follow-up attack. And then when it comes to his ultimate is single target, and then whoever it hits, it's going to apply a debuff that'll make it to where whenever one of your allies, and only your allies, not Dr.Ratio, whenever one of your allies hits the enemy with either an ultimate or a skill or a basic attack or a follow-up attack even, it's going to trigger a follow-up attack for Dr.Ratio with a 100% chance. So like right here, you can see that the enemy that I used my ultimate on has a 60% chance, like right now. Follow-up attack. But now that I'm going to basic attack with Fushuan, there's going to be a 100% chance that it triggered his follow-up attack right there. A quick little tip when using Dr.Ratio's ultimate is that even though, yes, you're already going to have a 100% chance of triggering a follow-up attack with him, when you hit the enemy who you used your ultimate on with one of your allies, you're still going to want to debuff the enemy as much as you can prior because even though it's not going to increase your chances of doing a follow-up attack, it's still going to take advantage of those follow-up attacks and do as much damage as you can. So like right here, I can either use Dr.Ratio's ultimates and then do a basic attack with Bella and then an ultimate with Bella and trigger those 2 follow-up attacks, or I can first apply as many debuffs as I can and then I'm going to ult with Dr.Ratio, so that whenever I use my ultimate with Fu Xuan, the follow-up attack that is guaranteed because of Dr.Ratio's ultimate, it's actually going to do a good chunk of damage rather than it being wasted because I didn't apply those debuffs prior. And then another thing with Dr.Ratio's skill and his follow-up attack is that if his skill kills an enemy, the follow-up attack won't cancel and instead it will go and it will hit another enemy. And then to check how many follow-up attacks you have remaining from Dr.Ratio's ultimate, you can check down at the bottom left near his icon. As you can see right there, there's 2 little lights right next to that logo. Once I do a follow-up attack, one of those lights got taken out. And then yeah, once you kill the enemy that had that status effect that let you do the follow-up attacks from Dr.Ratio's ultimate, those stacks are completely gone. The debuff doesn't transfer over to another enemy. So that's pretty much the gist of how you build and use Dr.Ratio. If you have any other characters that you'd want me to make a guide on, please leave it down in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please like and subscribe.